As I said, I think one final time for those people that have just come in, if you could stay on mute, this session will be recorded. And as I said, there is a Q&A section at the back end of this, a solid 10 or 15 minutes or whatever time that allows. So we'll fill your questions in. We absolutely want to make sure that you get answers to some questions today. My name is Adam Nixon. I'll be moderating this today and moving the people around the park. I guess the core presentation is going to be done by Scott Mathrick there, the technical director of Kane Mathrick Tech. A lot of experience, a lot of real world experience in terms of helping clients both pre-getting attacked, post-attack, so wealth of experience. I think, Scott, on that note, we might ask you to do a quick introduction, say hello.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. You pretty much summed it up. So Scott Mathrick, the technical director here at KMT, and I'm responsible for our cyber security platform and also our projects team. So we do all the integrations here at KMT.
Thanks so much, mate, for your input today and that intro. Brett Lodge.
Yeah, g'day. Yeah, thanks. So thanks, Adam. Yeah, Brett Lodge, Managing Director at Subnet. So I'm helping support the entire team at Subnet in South Australia, and obviously with a focus on our Plus security offering. So yeah, looking forward to today and hope everyone gets a great deal out of it.
Thank you so much. And Clinton Henderson.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Clinton Henderson, Technical Services Director for OPC. OPC's been in the industry for 30 years. I've been here for 25. Initially fixing typewriters 30 years ago, and now moving more into that security space. And I head that team. OPC's ISO 27001 and 9001 certified, and are on the path to SOC 2 Type 2. So any questions, happy to feed them, and looking forward to today.
Thanks so much, Clint. And Dudley Neller from Gaddens.
Thanks, Adam. I'm a bit of the odd one out here. I'm a partner at a law firm, Gaddens, and my specialty is really in the security and technology space. So I help a lot of clients manage cybersecurity incidents and events and help them step through ransomware attacks and those sorts of things that we all are seeing a lot more of. So I've been asked to join the call and talk a little bit about that later on. So I hope everyone gets a lot out of today's session. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks so much, guys. And as I said last year, Adam Nixon, Managing Director at Core Technology Partners. We're a Sydney-based MSP. Like most MSPs, cybersecurity is at the forefront of our clients' minds these days. So we do a lot of consultation and remediation services around what the path should be moving forward to ensure that our clientele is not under threat of digital attack, or certainly to remediate that risk. That's great. I think, with the point that time we're at the moment, as I said, please do ask your questions through chat. We'll give you that opportunity at the back end of this, but with no further ado, I think I will pass over to Scott.
Thanks, Adam. So just before I kick into this, everyone, I'll try and make this as interactive as possible. So I will provide as many examples and go through and give you real world scenarios of what's happening. So today, what we're going to cover. So why cybercrime will continue to surge in 2022. Is my business really at risk? We'll dive straight into that as well. How a cyber attack would affect your business. Critical layers of using the Essential 8. I'm hoping that you've all heard of the Essential 8. If not, we are going to delve into that as well and really flesh that out. And things that you can do today to protect your business from an attack. So the aim of the presentation is I don't want to bore you, so I'll probably be speaking for about 30 to 35 minutes, but please ask questions, raise your hands, and Adam will field those questions that are coming through as well. So first of all, why cyber will continue to grow. So one of the biggest factors that we're facing now is we're no longer in the office anymore. So we need to start focusing on protecting the endpoint. So I know now we're all working at home. We may be doing a rotational, roster back to the office, but it means now that we're no longer behind the castle wall, so to speak. So we need to get smart now about protecting the endpoint. And when I say endpoint, it means laptop, desktop, iPad, phones, etc., that are outside of the office. So because we're working outside the office, we're no longer protected by that company firewall anymore. So we're literally sitting on a desktop. We could be tethered to a mobile phone. We could be sitting home where we have a little Telstra modem or an Optus modem or something outside that doesn't offer us the security that what we would have inside those business walls. And we're also playing on unsecured networks now. I work from home. I have 4 children. They're playing Roblox. They're watching movies. They're on Netflix. They're downloading movies. So there's a lot of stuff happening on all these networks now that wouldn't traditionally happen in your office. So we need to get smarter now and really focus on how we can protect the actual endpoint. We're also using a lot of cloud services now. And I think what most people assume is that cloud's just safe because it's cloud. But we still need to protect our data. And if you read the fine print from Microsoft, especially within their Office 365 platform, if you read it, it actually says in there that it's our platform, it's your data, it's your responsibility. And because we're in the cloud, it doesn't mean that things are secure anyway, especially using services like Azure. We still need to lock those platforms down. We still need to implement firewalls and best practices as we were if we had that infrastructure in our office. We also need to protect all our extended environments. We've got a lot of B2B stuff happening now. So as an example, we work with a firm and they're a lab and they do a lot of dental work, and they have all their customers, which are dentists, that actually bring all their drawings and their diagrams and their models back into their platform. So they use Dropbox for that. So the actual lab will share out the file, and then that goes to a dentist. Now, again, we're sharing our supply chain with them, and supply chain could be other third parties. There's so many different versions of supply chain, but in this instance, what happened is one of the third parties, so one of the dentists, they weren't locked down. Unfortunately, they had a ransomware attack. That ransomware came back into the business and it encrypted all their data. So we had backups of that, but I think it's very important, and we'll touch on this more later, but we actually need to know where our data is coming in from and where our data sits. Because when you flesh things out, especially during the pandemic, we're all working from different locations. Our data is now spread out. So it's important as a business owner to actually understand where that data is sitting. And then obviously one of the biggest one is untrained users. So the biggest thing that we can do is train our users. That's our biggest loophole. And if we go through the reports, which you'll see shortly, most of the cyber incidents or attacks are happening because of untrained users. So we really need to start training our users and get it forefront of mind all the time and building that cyber culture within our businesses. So here's some of the facts, and I don't want to bore you with too much of this stuff, but all this information is available on the notifiable breaches report, which can be downloaded. It's released every 6 months from the government. So this isn't stats that we've actually put together ourselves. This is straight off one of the reports. So the average time that it takes to identify a breach is 207 days. So that means in that instance that someone is in your environment and just looking, and they're sitting there to try and work out where the crown jewels are and what they can and can't get access to. Now, an example of that, there's a company that we were dealing with a couple of years ago up in Queensland, and they had 26 servers, and they didn't realize, but someone had actually penetrated into their environment and they'd gone into their backup software. And when they'd got in there, they actually hadn't set off any alarms, but they'd gone into the backup software and they'd unchecked all the folders. So the actual backup was finishing every night. It was saying that it was successful, but it was actually backing up nothing. And what happens with backup systems, there's always some kind of retention period. So after the 30 days, we were backing up nothing for 30 days. And then on the 30th day, we backed up the last backup, and then the attacker implanted ransomware. Now, this was about 2 or 3 years ago. What happened then is the company thought they had backups. On checking, they realized that they hadn't, because all their backups had disappeared. They had no offsite backup. And then they had to pay the ransom. They had no way out apart to pay the ransom. Now, they had 26 servers. The first ransom they paid was about $54,000. They then got the decryption keys. What they found out after doing the decryption, that the decryption keys worked on 24 servers, not on the full 26. And the 2 servers that it didn't work on were their domain controllers, meaning they couldn't authenticate, the users couldn't get in. So they had data, but they had actually no mechanism really for the users to log back in and access their data. So they paid the second ransomware. I don't know the total of the second. I'm assuming it was well over $50,000. They ended up getting their data back, but it took them about 60 days to get their data back. So we need to understand the impacts of obviously having backups and the restore time that it takes to get the backups back up and going, but also the recovery backup objective as well. So how much data that we can lose and the time that it takes us to actually restore that data. Going down on the left-hand side, 5% of data is protected. This is a big one. We had a company last year during the pandemic wanted to know where all their data was. And as most companies did, we all fled home. We went to Officeworks and JB Hi-Fi and we bought monitors and computers because no one was set up to work. And people started using Dropbox, OneDrive, Box, SharePoint, and then all of a sudden, as a company, as a business owner, the people didn't know where their data was. So it's really important now that we can actually go through all our data sets and understand where that data is coming back into the business. Is it stored on home desktops? Is it being backed up properly? And there's many types of solutions that can be put in place to actually mitigate that and fix it up. But it's just understanding your baseline of where you are with that. Going down the left-hand side, so 94% is all delivered by malware. We all know that. That's been thrown at us for months now. I'll talk more about that in a minute, about email compromises. And 43% of attacks are small businesses, and that's because we don't have the foundations in place or the actual budgets to put in a proper cybersecurity platform. And 95% is all human error. Again, it comes back to that training. We need to ingrain in our staff what to look for. And make sure that we're actually clicking on links and trying to hover on links and see where our data is actually going. So again, it's having that culture built within the business. So phishing's still the number one threat. You can see it there. It's at 50%. Again, this is all the information that comes from the notifiable data breaches report. But that's our biggest threat, is our phishing. So you've probably seen in the past emails from JB Hi-Fi saying that you've been given a voucher, AusPost, Office 365 password resets. That's always coming around. So we need to train the users not to actually click on those links, because if a phishing attack happens, that's when we're actually losing or passing over those stolen credentials. We also need to be listed on the dark web as well. If you don't have a dark web monitoring service now, that's something it's quite cheap to implement, but it actually gives you a monitoring program to actually look if you're listed on the dark web. So one of our clients a couple of years ago, they've been on our cyber platform now for about 3 years, and one of the ladies had a password that she had a phishing attack on and didn't realize, and her password was actually listed on the dark web. So we rung that user because we had the alert go off in our back-end system. We rang up the user, we asked her what her password was. She told us it was the same password that was listed on the dark web. And then we also asked her what was that password used for? And she said it was my banking, it was her Medicare login, it was her Netflix login, it was the login for everything. She had one single password. So we said, right, first of all, best practice is to have different passwords for everything that you access, but we now need to change all those passwords because you've actually had a breach. And then obviously brute force attack, which I'm hoping this doesn't happen to you when you actually have your networks locked down properly. But we go to many clients and do audits and assessments, and we always check the external ports. And we had a client a couple of months ago, customer, they're now a client. We had them a couple of months ago. We went and did their audit and assessment, and they were having about 24,000 password attempts on one of their servers every single hour. And it's because the perimeter wasn't locked down properly, and there was people sitting out there and they were trying to penetrate and actually brute force and guess what that password was. So we're seeing that as well. And then you can see there, which is quite surprising, that ransomware is only 3%. But the thing I wanted to talk about this slide is that it is 3%, but all those passwords and getting access to the system comes from that phishing attempt. So phishing, if we're looking at that graph, it's 50% plus stolen credentials. So nearly 70%, we're getting passwords through those attacks to then enable an attacker to actually implant ransomware. So that's still the biggest threat we're facing at the moment. So more stats from the report. This is the last stat page that we'll go through, but apparently, if we're reading the report, we're losing $33 billion per year to cybercrime. All the incidents are increasing. We're at 310% now of incidents. If we look at last year alone, off that report, there was 67,500 incidents reported to the government. And if we check back year on year, it's nearly doubling every year. So the numbers are increasing. 15% increase in ransomware, and 75% of those attacks have lost money. And again, that comes down to those phishing incidents, which we'll talk about more later. And we can see there, 13% rise in attacks, and that's 67,500. And again, the human error element, that's on every single report we see. It comes into it. And again, It's about training the staff and making sure they know what to look for when those nasty emails come through. So who's been hit? These are some of the companies that we probably have all heard of. Southern Health was as recent as last year. So they had a ransomware attack on their patient system. So they lost 80,000 files of employee phone numbers and contacts. So that was one of the latest ones we've heard about. We had the Cabrini Health about 2 years ago. They lost 15,000 records, but the real severe thing with the Cabrini breach was that they lost blood types, they lost allergies, they lost medication information, all really sensitive data, and they were down for 3 weeks. Now, we have a lot of medical staff or customers that work with us that actually work out of Cabrini, and we've had conversations with them that during that time they had patients that would come in, they're doing operations on those patients, and they literally had no access to any of their patient data during those events. So that was a really crippling event for the hospital. We've had Toyota. Last year, they had a ransomware attack in Port Melbourne, which is their head office. All their phone system was taken down last year, so they actually didn't have a phone system for about a week. You've heard of Toll. Toll had 2 attacks by the same company. So the attackers that came out, and this is well documented on Google, the attack was by a company called the Knee Film Gang. And what it did, they implanted a ransomware attack by some software that wasn't locked down. They encrypted all the data. And what that affected was the toll tracing parcel app. So there's an app on a phone that a customer can log in and actually see where their parcel is. It actually took down that whole app, and it was down for about 3 weeks. So that was one of the major ones as well. Toll Group then plugged the hole. They thought so, and then the same company went back and penetrated it again and took down the application for a second time. We've heard of the AFL. They lost 75,000 member records. That was last year. And the government, they had a breach. That was documented in the news probably about 2 years ago, where they blamed their antivirus for not being updated, which was the cause of their infection. So I suppose one of the takeaways from this slide is that these are big companies. They invest a lot in cybersecurity. They've got bigger budgets than all of us, and they're still having attacks. So I suppose the theme of this slide is that there's no silver bullet. We just have to do the best we can with the budgets that we have to protect what we have. So we'll go through and we'll talk about the types of attacks. So the first one is ransomware. So I'm sure that you all know what it is, but ransomware is effectively when someone gets access to your system, and they actually plan in what's called ransomware, and that encrypts your data. So your data files become, or the actual extensions of those files change to about 30 character digits, all different letters and numbers. And it means that when you double click on that file, you actually can't access that data. So the ways around that obviously is backup obsessively. This is the biggest thing, like that example that I spoke about before when I opened up the presentation about the client up in Queensland. We need 3 sets of data sets. So that means we have your production data, we have a backup on site, but we also have a backup off site with a total different provider that's also locked down, whether it be by MFA or different ways. We have to have 3 sets of data all the time, and we need to be checking our backups to making sure that we're backing up what we think we're actually backing up. We also need some kind of layered protection. So by that, I mean he's trying to understand what our crown jewels are, because cybersecurity can become expensive. So if, as an example, our sales software provides most of our business revenue, then that's where we should be focusing our budget to make sure that we can protect that first, because that has the biggest impact on our business. Then we need to combine experts in technology. There's a lot of different technologies that we can put in to actually stop ransomware in its tracks. There's programs that can be deployed on endpoints that are actually smart enough to know that when a ransomware attack is happening, they can actually shut down the machine and take it off the network. They also have rollback points as well. So it's important that we understand what technologies are there that we can actually use to actually stop ransomware. One of the biggest thing is don't pay ransomware. And if you're speaking to your cyber insurances, they'll actually guide you through the same way. We'll talk about more about cyber insurance later. But one of the golden rules is we just don't pay the ransom, but we make sure at the same time we've got the backups there to help us and ensure we don't have to do that, and have a recovery plan one of the biggest questions we ask all businesses, have you got some kind of incident response plan? My question 18 times out of 20 is always no. Most of our companies that we work with don't have that plan. And just going back to the ransom, the reason that I'm saying is don't pay the ransomware, excuse me, what a lot of companies now are doing, attackers are doing, is even if they're paying the ransom, even if they refuse to pay the ransomware, now the attackers are using what's called extortion. So even if we go back to the attacker, and actually once the breach happens, we actually get put in contact with the attacker, and it's all done via email. And they ask questions, and it's a conversation that you have. But they actually threaten you that if you don't pay the ransomware, they are going to then use extortion and release your data anyway. So that's where the cyber insurance side of it comes in, which we'll talk about more shortly. So here's some of the types. Now, these are the common ones. You've probably all heard of these, but invoice fraud, this is one of the biggest ones that we see all the time. I'm assuming it's happened to quite a few people on this call, but that's when an invoice is intercepted by an attacker, and they change the BSB and account number of that invoice because they've got access to your email system, and then they send it back to the person, and the third-party person pays it. So as an example of this, we were working with a football player last year. He'd bought a house. So he got the invoice from the surveyor to actually pay the fees. It was about $250,000. So the football player just got the bill and just paid the fee. What he didn't realise was the surveyor was on Google Mail and hadn't realised, and he got a call from the surveyor saying, "Hey, we're just waiting for this. We've got to settle." And the other gentleman as well, "I've just paid it. I paid it about a week ago." And they said, "No, look, I'm sorry, we still haven't received it." They went back through the Google platform and realized that they had been compromised in that Google platform, and they'd actually paid someone else to an offshore account, and the money was gone. So that's what we're seeing all the time. I'm actually building a house now. I'm paying some quite large bills, and the first thing that I do for every single invoice that I pay, it comes from the same people, but every time they send me an invoice, I pick up the phone and I ring up their accounts lady and I said, "Hey, Jenny, I'm just going to pay this. Can I please check your BSB and account number again?" I just always do it. And I think we need to ingrain that into all areas of our business. It's old school. It's very simple, but it's the most effective way to make sure that this doesn't happen. Now, the next two are about impersonating a person or a company. This is happening quite a lot as well. So that's when where an attacker is registering a domain name that's very similar to yours. So as an example, let's take millers.com.au. So millers.com.au. Now, if an attacker was to register a domain that was milers.com.au, a capital I looks the same as a capital L. They then have a domain name that's very similar to yours. They then jump on LinkedIn. They find all the people that work for your company, all their email addresses. They then create all those email addresses within their infrastructure with that impersonated domain, and then they start to send your staff invoices. Or there could be a brand new person starting. They sit back and they may see that a new person is starting in accounts, and they impersonate the CEO and send that email to that new starter saying, "Hey, it's just Rob here. I need this paid, please, ASAP." And if the person doesn't know the process and it's the CEO asking for that, they're probably just going to pay that invoice. So it's making sure that we have all that user training in place so that that doesn't happen. Using MFA, if we're not using it, we should be on absolutely everything you can. We've been doing this for years anyway, especially with banks. So the CommBank, whenever you transfer money or do a BPay, you've received that text message. It's exactly the same thing. We've been doing this for probably 15 years. But now it's making sure that we have MFA on all the services, on all the VPNs. So when we're connecting to the corporate network, on all our Office 365, on all our third-party apps, if we're using Xero, on Google Mail, any SaaS-based platform, most of them now support MFA. So that is an absolute must. And again, that's listed within the Essential 8. And a protective business process in place. So again, having that process that when that bill needs to be paid, what's the process internally and what has to happen? And again, it could be as simple as picking up the phone and ringing that third party, but again, ingraining that into all areas of your business. So how are we prepared as a business? And this is one of the slides that I wanted to focus on because as a business owner, I suppose we need to understand now, and Microsoft say this to us all the time now, that we are responsible. It's our data, it's our responsibility. We need to understand governance as well, and what's required, and building that into all parts of the business. And governance isn't just doing a check each 12 months and checking a box. It's making sure that we've got all the processes and procedures in place, and we follow them all year round, so that in the event of a breach, and we go to our cyber protection company or our cyber insurance, they actually ask for all that information, and we can give them a run book of everything that we've done and just prove to them that we've been doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that we're compliant with what they need, but also being compliant with all the laws as well, and who we have to notify to. So we've got APRA, we've got ASIC, we've got the Data Privacy Act, we've got the Consumer Act. There's so many different laws around, and we need to know which ones we have to notify in the event of a breach. And also coming back to the B2B operations as well, understanding all that data that's feeding into our systems. Now, we have a lot of third-party apps that we use for our support, and we actually go back to these companies and actually ask them for all their process, their procedures, and their compliance documents to understand if they have a breach, what's the consequence to us. And that's one of the key takeaways at Workout. One, where your data is, but what governance the parties have that you're actually working with. And we need to actually monetize our data. So like I spoke before, work out what's our crown jewels and how much that we can actually spend on our cybersecurity platform. So we work with many companies, and I've got one company that's a coffee company. They've been around for about 80 years, and they've told us that if their system is down, they lose about $1 million every week. Now, we've got other companies that have about 60 staff, but they can work off paper for 2 to 3 weeks and then back entry. So if their system's down, they actually aren't losing money. They can still trade and still function as a business. So I think it's important to really understand and do a risk profile on our businesses to understand what happens if those systems are down, and have an incident response plan to complement that, to understand exactly what has to happen in those situations. But also understanding the technologies that we're using as well. Like, we come across so many companies now that have thumbprint scanners for all their staff to sign on. So these are third-party IoT devices. So if we've got them in our environment, if they're on the corporate network, that poses a massive risk as well, because it's actually on the same networks as all our core data. So that's really important that we understand, again, where all those technologies come into the business. I know Target had a breach about 5 years ago, and they had solar panels on their roof, and the attackers penetrated the solar panels, and the people that put the solar panels were on their corporate network, and it took down their ERP system. So Target, it was one store, but that Target system couldn't actually trade because they had a full ransomware attack. So it's important that we understand and flesh out from a business level where everything joins into our ecosystem. So what should we be considering as a cyber strategy? So this is where we talk about the Essential 8. So what is the Essential 8? Just quickly, it's a framework of strategies to help and prevent cybersecurity incidents from online threats. And it was designed by the ACSC, which is the Australian Cyber Security Centre, which is a government body. This is regulated. This has been around now for quite some years, and now it's becoming prominent because everyone is talking about it. It's based on 8 recommended strategies to implement within your business. This has been a hot topic last year, especially during COVID. And all government bodies now actually have to follow this, and they have to report on it and prove their compliance every single year. We've got a few customers here that are working with government bodies, and unless they have this in place, they actually can't go for third-party tenders with those governments. So this is something that's happening now. It's been around for a while, but it is going to come into full play and become a must in the coming years. So what is it? So we'll go through the Essential 8 quickly. So we've got the application whitelisting. So that's where we actually whitelist the applications that are allowed to run. So we actually understand what's across all our fleet of devices, and we stop all the applications that shouldn't be on any of those machines. Patching, if you have an MSP, they should be doing that now. So that's where we're just patching, like your PDF viewers, Java. Windows updates, for example. Configuring macros, one of the biggest ones from the Essential 8 is they focus on macros. And that's because when a macro runs in Excel, it's a native Windows process. So the antivirus software or the EDR software doesn't pick it up because it's a built-in Excel, Microsoft Office trusted process. So what attackers will do, they'll actually go in and they'll change those macros. So when the customer runs them, they're actually running something else, but they're trusted by the system, and that's how they can implant, some kind of malware or ransomware attack. Application hardening, we're blocking apps like Flash, Java, like storing passwords within Google. We're actually blocking what users can and can't do, and we need third-party apps to actually achieve this, but we need to really lock down everything to the bare minimum. Admin privileges. If anyone has admin rights, if you're logging into a computer now with admin rights, you shouldn't be. You should have a separate account for it. So as an example, my login is SMathric, that's my normal login. And if I need to log off and do something that needs admin privileges, I log off and I log back in as SMathric_ADM for my admin account. It's a totally separate account. We manage about 4,500 endpoints with our clients. I think we might have 5 people that actually have admin rights because they need it. The rest of our clients don't have it. They shouldn't have it. Patch operating systems. Again, we're just patching the actual operating system, whether it's Mac, Windows, even Mac, there's still viruses. We need to patch all those applications and operating systems. MFA, we've spoken about. It needs to be turned on, and it needs to be turned on everything you have. And then backups. We need to have backups. That's our last source of protection. So having the backups, making sure that the backups are monitored, that they're reported. And again, just to stress, we need 3 levels of backup, or three levels of data sets. So the production data, a backup on-site for fast restore, and a backup off-site through a completely different provider that's actually locked down and verified and reported on each day. And if you have MSPs that you're all working with now, they need to be providing you a backup report. And if you're not getting it, you need to ask for it, just to make sure that you've got confidence in the event that something goes wrong, your backups have been tested. And then the next point, we've spoken about the Essential 8, but what happens when a breach takes place? So we actually need some kind of detection in place. So that's having the tools and the alerts to go off to actually tell us something's happening. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to stop the attack, but it means that it flags it with us. We know what's happening, and then we can use our tool sets to stop that attack. And that's where the management phase comes in. So we have this the incident register. And again, this is really crucial, especially if you have cyber insurance and going through the attack. The actual process that you go through with a cyber insurance company, it's a very straightforward process, but it's very structured. So the first things they are going to ask you is your incident register, because they want to know everything that has happened from start to finish. And when that attack takes place, you can't just start restoring data, because you need to leave that source data that's been infected intact, because what happens is they send in their forensic team. They come in. Now, this process could take weeks, but they come in and they go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, and they actually understand where the attacks come in, how, and what processes or governance wasn't in place, and they actually provide you a full incident report of what happened, because naturally they're trying to not pay your insurance claim. But if you actually touch any of that and start restoring data, you'll actually breach the claim, which means you'll have nowhere to fall back on. But going back to the cyber insurance, which is important, it's great to actually have that in place, not only to protect yourself, but when something does happen and you need that phone call, you've got someone to ring. They have crisis management on hand. They have lawyers on hand. They have all the governance people to tell you what business or industry that you fall into, who you have to notify, and they hold your hand and walk you through that whole process. But again, you need to follow their whole process, and having the right platform in place gives you all that information that you can simply hand over the run book to the insurance company and say, right, here's our run book, and that's got everything in it, and it documents the whole attack from start to finish. And then last, reporting. And again, the cyber insurance company would actually show you or advise you who you need to report that attack to, which is pretty important. And all those bodies that you have to report to, they all have different lead times. There's different periods. There's some have a notification period of when the attack takes place. Some people have it after you fix the attack, and having all that information from the cyber company will guide you on the right road to take. So why regulation? Well, the government have invested 1.67 billion into this strategy over the next 10 years, and they're focusing on getting this right. They're putting a lot of thought into it. I think during the COVID pandemic, this has escalated. So they're really trying to create a baseline regulation of best practice, and that's the Essential 8. It is going to become a must moving forward. So why I work with a cyber partner, I just want to start by especially talking about MSP and an MSSP. A managed service provider is not responsible for providing you with a cyber platform unless they have an MSSP part or pillar of their business. The job of a managed service provider is to keep the lights on. They patch your operating systems, they check your backups, they provide triage and third-party support. They are not responsible, though, for actually protecting your data, because that still falls within your responsibility. So there is a huge difference. So partnering with an MSSP or someone that has the experience in cyber security, it just means that they can manage the whole thing. They have a depth of expertise, which is a different expertise to a managed service provider. Again, it's one throat to choke. Similar to an MSP, there's a team of people there that are just skilled up in that area. That's all they do, and it's actually separate from the MSP business. And it means that they can focus on actually giving you a specialized platform and monitor that platform and make sure that that's all working properly. Now, some of those take form in a totally separate company. We have MSPs where they farm out that to a totally separate company. And we have other MSPs that actually offer that as part of their solution as well. But again, it's getting that scale, because it's very hard for a small business to hire one professional to take care of everything, because a professional in that space is quite expensive. So again, it's still having that MSP model, and just making sure that we've got all the endpoint protection in place, like the EDR, which is endpoint detection and response, SEAM solutions, and they actually guide you on all the regulations that you actually need to follow as well. So what's it mean for me? Well, pretty simple. It's a benefits. It's similar to having an MSP looking after everything. They close the gaps. They make it simple. It's a monthly fee, so similar to your ongoing OPEX. You can forecast your costs, what they are. It's always changing. They're always upgrading all their programs. I know we've got our cyber platform that keeps evolving. We've just made some more changes to it. Some new products have come out. So that's something that our team will focus on all the time. And you've got one contact as well. So when an MSSP and an MSP together, they're normally the same company. If they are, it just makes things so much easier to actually work with them. And then what you get from the Essential 8 review, well, first of all, we've just got to get a baseline of where you're at. Now, the baseline ranges from 0 to 3, which we'll look at in a second, but we need to understand exactly of the Essential 8 what you cover, and really that's sitting down with you and going through your business, your processes, and really trying to get a good understanding of your business. And where we can help, well, that's what we do. We come in, we do the Essential 8 review, we identify the gaps, and then propose new things to you of what you can to fill those gaps. And like I said before, cybersecurity can be expensive, so it's really trying to understand your business properly, where the crown jewels are, what's the most important data sets, and trying to focus around that, and trying to build out the process with whatever budgets that you guys have. So what's the Essential 8? The levels, we've got the levels there are 0 to 3. So most of the companies that we're using, or working with, I should say, are really between the 0 and 1. That's what we're finding out now. So really around level 1, where they have some things in, they may have MFA turned on, they're patching their operating systems, they've got backups in place, but they haven't disabled their macros. They haven't done any whitelisting. There's just a few things that they need help with because they don't have the expertise to actually do that. And that's where the MSSP comes in to actually fill those gaps for you. Level 3, really for those enterprise level companies that have sophisticated teams in-house that work with a third-party provider. And that's all they focus on, and it's regulated. They've got governance, they've got all the processes in place, and triage teams to make sure that they're actually hitting that all the time. So the pandemic effect, well, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. 600% increase. Like I said before, we're all working from homes. We're sitting in cafes. We're tethered to mobile phones. We're on Wi-Fi networks. I was at Chadstone last week. I joined their Wi-Fi network. We're all working. Our work life's changed. So trying to protect now the actual the corporate network has changed. We're now protecting the endpoint. And when I say endpoint, it means all those people with a company protected device. We can see the breaches there by IBM. The average breach last year that was reported was $137,000. A couple of years ago, this was about $45,000. So it's escalating quickly. And Zoom, obviously we're all on Zoom, we're on Teams, 5,000 accounts hacked last year. So that's what the criminals are going to target, because that's what's happening around the world. We're all using these kind of platforms. And what we're seeing, especially in the States as well, one of the pipelines had an attack there last year. It was the Colonial Pipeline, and they feed all the service stations in the US. And what happened, they realized that all the users are working from home. So they tried to penetrate the users' computers, and they were successful in doing that, which didn't give them, much to work with, because the users were home sitting in their, lounge rooms. But what they realized was when those users come back to work, they actually monitored all the users. As the users come back to work, they planted a ransomware attack. And it was a supply chain that took out 45% of their petrol stations. So, the attackers are getting smart, where they get in, they look, and they sit back and work out exactly what's happening, where people are, their movements, and when the time's right, they actually plant that kind of attack. So again, not being behind the castle walls anymore, it just opens up everything again. So again, it's that point that I keep saying, is we're protecting the endpoint. So the cyber trends, obviously the pandemic, there's a 75% increase of the incidents resulted in Australians losing money, and most that's that Beck incident. So that's that email phishing incident. The disruption of essential services, we've talked about Cabrini, we've spoken about Southern Health, all ransomware attacks as well. Ransomware is up 15%. Supply chain incidents, this always comes up because we don't know our supply chain or where that data is coming in from. 54% increase in loss of business. But one thing that is one of the trends that we're seeing now is businesses are now understanding, one, that they need cyber insurance, and they are responsible. So that's the two key takeaways there from that slide. So the next steps, again, it's your data, it's your responsibility. So that's through Microsoft, but the Essential 8 review. So I suppose if you're working with the MSP now, the question is to answer, can your current MSP provide that for you? And if not, speak to someone that can. Determine your level within the Essential 8. It's quite easy. I'm assuming you'll get a copy of this slide deck from Adam. It's 8 things, it's documented, it's on the internet. Work out where you actually sit with that model, and have you got a response plan? And if you don't, start thinking how that can affect the business if something does go wrong. And if there's any answer to any of those questions, ask one of the panelists on this, and we can definitely help with that. Again, you're probably doing some of it, and you might just need that third-party help just to plug those holes. And with that, Adam, that's what I had. I was trying to keep it short and sweet, so I'll throw over back to you for questions.
Scotty, that's fantastic, and I think the combination of some of the stats and practical advice and business advice will be well received. I think it's testament to the presentation today that every one of the people that joined from the start are still with us, which is fairly rare in the world that we live in webinars. So look, appreciate everyone's staying around for us. Again, Scotty, really good. I thank you. One thing I sort of didn't mention at the start of the presentation today is, and I think it's a really relevant point here, is that there is a number of different MSSPs on this call. So we've got, Scotty is from K-Mathric Tech. We've got Brett from Subnet out of South Australia. K-Mathric is down in Melbourne. We've got Clint from OPC out of Canberra. And we are a Sydney-based MSP. The important point here is we all see this so regularly that we've come together in an attempt to educate Australian businesses, because we honestly feel that it's the wheel is moving too slowly. We are constantly helping all our clients. Dudley, through his organisation, is constantly help clients that unfortunately are one of the statistics, and it's just happening, as Scotty said through the presentation today, far too often. So on that note, I think, we are truly competitors, yet we've come together. And if we can do that, then we're encouraging every one of you, if it wasn't clear, to go and do a gap analysis, right? Either do it internally if you have that capability, or reach out externally and do a gap analysis against where you are today to find out where your risk is. And that's a really easy starting point, as Scott touched on. We have a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to touch on those in a second, but I want to throw over to Dudley very quickly. Dudley, Scott mentioned directors' duties and responsibilities of the board in his presentation. And I'd like you to talk to us through some of the things boards and their directors should have considered on their security to-do list.
Yep, and I don't want to sort of thank Sam for that. I don't want to go over what Scotty's talked about. He's stepped through some of the things that you should all have on your to-do list as organisations. But in terms of directors' duties and responsibilities of the board, historically, this has been an IT issue. It's been an IT risk. It's been an IT problem, and many organisations just push it down to the guys in the tech group to sort out or work through. The reality is this isn't security isn't a technology issue alone. It's actually just a genuine and all of business risk. So if you're an organisation that has pushed the responsibility for managing security solely onto your IT team, you need to take back ownership of that. Security needs to be managed from the top down. It needs to be led by the directors, by the board of the organisation. In terms of other things to note or comment on really quickly, understand some of the quick wins from a security perspective. Scott's been really helpful in terms of some of those things you should have on your to-do list. He's talked about mitigating risks through cyber insurance, and be aware cyber insurance is an important thing to consider, but not all insurance policies are created equal. The big print giveth and the small print taketh away is never truer of cyber insurance. So be careful if you are looking to mitigate risks through cyber insurance. Having an effective contract with your vendors, having effective conversations with your vendors. The guys on the presentation today are all open to having conversations about how you can manage your security risk more effectively. So make sure you take them up on those options. Scott did mention the importance of incident response planning. That's not a document that just sits in the filing cabinet and you look at sort of every 5 years and hope that it works when you need it. You need to be testing that incident response plan. That response plan needs to have effective contact details for people that will help your organisation. On that plan, you'll need to have contact people for forensics. You'll need to have your MSP. If you've got cyber insurance, great, have those included as well. But make sure that plan works and is tailored to your organisation. That's probably enough for that question, Adam. Hopefully that's helpful.
Sorry, I'm just on mute there. It's fantastic, and why I wanted to throw to you first, Dudley, is that what we don't want you to do is take the mechanics out of this process and think it's all IT, and that's exactly what you've touched on there, Dudley. There is responsibilities that directors' duties and boards, really have a responsibility to take this back. IT do their best within the budget that you allocate. So I think that's a great set of recommendations there from someone that is not IT focused, Dudley. So it's great. I think you unpacked something there that I want to touch on, and I might throw this to Brett Lodge, who talked about insurances in terms of best practices. I know, Brett, recently you've had a lot of experience in working with clients to review the gotchas, as Dudley mentioned there. Not all insurance policies are the same, and it is an absolutely changing landscape globally. Do you
Absolutely.
want to unpack that for us?
Yeah, exactly. I think really it kind of comes down to what we've been talking about today is like we're seeing in the industry from a cyber threat point of view, there's obviously a lot more threats in the industry, and that is shaking up the cyber insurance as a whole. Where even in Australia, there's kind of that 4 or 5 different underwriters for a lot of the insurance companies, and we're seeing some of those underwriters now starting to disappear based on the volume of threat and the volume of payouts. It's really making a massive difference. So we're seeing things like the cyber insurance premiums go through the roof. We're seeing between 2 and 4 times multiplies just literally on the year on year from some of our clients. We're also seeing a lot more scrutiny on getting cyber insurance in the first place. So if anyone's done it recently, instead of getting the 1 or 2 page, here's some questions you might need to answer, you're now getting a 20 or 30 page document, which really delves into where have you gone to, what have you done, how are you protecting yourself. And so we're seeing out of that, we've even seen some clients now be rejected for cyber insurance, full stop. We've got one client that we deal with. It's a new client of ours, but they've been in business for over 100 years. They've got 10 sites. So this is a large company, and they're essentially been outright rejected for cyber insurance based on their current policies and where it's currently at. So there's a few things. I read a lot of security policies. I read a lot of security policies, but I also read a lot of insurance policies for clients. And as Dudley mentioned, there is a lot of things that in those security policies and the incident response plans and insurance policies you do need to think about. You can't just, sign them off and have you go. So one of the things that we're seeing, or some tips, as a quick update for what you should be looking at, things like making sure you really understand how you need to contact them, when you need to contact them. So that's all kind of coming in your incident response plan. Make sure you're double checking things like the service levels. So obviously, as we all mentioned, we're, as managed security service providers, quite often we're not allowed to touch the environment until you've contacted them. Now, if your service levels with the insurance company, they're technical people in the background, we've seen anything up to a 1 week service level. So if you had to wait for a week for your cyber insurer to get back to you to say what you can do and you're out for that period, that's a massive issue. Most of them kind of come down to 24 hours, so that's not too bad, but just be aware of that and check that in your policy. Make sure you have enough coverage. That's the other thing we see a lot of. So recently in SA, we've seen a lot of cyber insurers with regards to real estate agencies. There's been specific attacks on real estate providers in the last couple of weeks. And obviously, as you will have heard, and some of the stuff that Scott mentioned earlier, you'll get claims from real estate agents where they'll take over bank details. Now, one of the ones I talked to recently had a $250,000 specific coverage on any bank fraud. Now, obviously, in their case, they could do $1 million transaction. So $250,000 would not be enough as far as a coverage option. So you do need to understand what your coverage is on particular things and align yourself that way. And also things like really just making sure that you do read through it, and you can obviously, we can't provide specific advice on insurance. That's not something we're able to do, but certainly running it through with your managed security service provider will help, understand some of the things that they can point out as far as your risk that you need to, go through in more detail. So that's probably my recommended advice.
Great advice, Brett. And I think, we've a lot of what it all ties back to too, and we've heard, Scott's mentioned that, you've touched on it, Dudley touched on it, is a tested cyber incident response plan. As an example, we had a client who we provide procurement services and project services to. They have an internal IT department contact us 3 days ago and said they are working through an incident, and it looks like they've been crypto attacked, right? Their files were corrupted and locked down. And they wanted us just to guide them through that because they had an internal IT team. The first question they asked them, how long has this been going for? 3 days. Great. You're calling us. We'll help you. Have you got cyber insurance? Yes, we do. Have you contacted them? No, we haven't. And that puts them at jeopardy in the moment that you need help. If it gets to the point where you want to call on that very, very expensive premium and policy that you're paying for, they may have jeopardized your ability to call on that support. So on that note, I think I'd like to invite Clint to talk us through the cyber incident response plan, and the process is often the key to recovery. Can you talk us through some of your experience in the testing process? What does best practice look like?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And at the risk of try not to repeat too often, because it's been covered by everyone else, we sit and do tabletop exercises with all our security customers. It's critical to pull out their business continuity plan and update that. Often it's sat in a drawer for the last 3 years before cybersecurity was such a big risk. So a lot of the times, cyber isn't even taken into consideration when it comes to the BCP. So what we do is we work with the clients to find the gaps in their BCP, and often that is actually bringing cyber into it. Find the gap in your provider's incident response plan. Make sure they've got a document incident response plan that actually will help your business. and understand your commitments and your communications. So communications is a key part of it. We run the exercises with the worst case scenario in mind, so it's often the scary things like 100% crypto, backups have been cryptoed, and what do you do? How does a business operate? We sit in the room with our clients or over Teams over the last 12 months. However, we sit silent. So we'll sit back, we'll watch and listen to the organisation run through their business continuity plan. And until we're actually called within their plan, we don't participate. We listen and then we start to provide feedback. And you'd be surprised how often we're in the room for 20 or 30 minutes before they've even contemplated or considered contacting OPC as their managed security provider. So that's 20 or 30 minutes of risk of this threat spreading across their environment and taking them down before they've even considered calling us as their managed security provider. What we find is they typically start going through the whole communications. Who do we communicate? How do we communicate? Can you draft this email and send it off to these people? We had one scenario where a client actually started drafting responses to the press, just in case the press came in contact and said, what do we do here? So they're starting to form communication channels and what they need to communicate without knowing a single fact. So it's important to understand what their process is so you can say, well, wait a minute, the first thing you need to do is contact your managed security provider. Yes, they should be across it already. The systems in place should highlight to them, but under an exercise, you always go the worst case. So it's a 0-day threat that's got through and we need to protect it. So your first point of call has to be your managed security provider. They need to be able to mitigate and remediate that risk. Your second point of call needs to be your insurance, and everyone's covered off that today and the importance of that. So make sure you do that second. We also, as everyone's discussed, part of the exercise, we recommend to our clients to call the insurance company. Go through the scenario you're running through at the time. 1, it gives you the opportunity to have you documented their phone number. 2, who do you call? 3, do they actually cover us for the scenario we're running through? And if they don't, what do we need to do to rectify that? So go through that process, update all that documentation into your business continuity plan. And then again, don't communicate until you know the facts. Until your provider and your insurers work together to understand what's happened, don't communicate. So often there'll be false positives. Someone will have what they think is ransomware, but the systems in place have mitigated that risk. Yet the communication has already started and they're discussing around the water cooler. Well, guess what? We've just been breached. There's a lot of business reputation that could be affected by that. So you need to mitigate that communication, reduce that back to the disaster recovery or the business continuity team and make sure they're all communicating with the facts. What we do recommend is part of the process is documenting templates for communication. So putting emails together as part of that communication strategy, just in case the worst case happens and you're in that position. So for us, the main takeaway is call your security provider first. So you're on this together. It's a journey you do together. Call your insurer second, and then plan your communications on the facts and what's actually happening. And then obviously update your BCP and come back around in a few weeks, if not a couple of months' time, to redo that exercise. Don't wait 12 months, 2 years. Redo that. Make sure what you've updated is clear and it's clear to everyone within the business on how you need to operate that. But that's how we go through it, Adam.
I think it's great advice, and the key message there is be prepared. All of us on this call have worked through with clients when they're trying to do this on the fly, and it is the worst time to do it. Be prepared, get it documented, understand whose job it is to do what, and what the communication looks like. Plan for the worst and hope for the best. And typically, you'll have a better recovery process. Look, I just want to acknowledge everyone's time. Now, this we are more than happy to hang around and answer any further questions here, but we've asked you to spend a lot of your day with us at the moment. We're here for as long as you need us. But at 1:02, I think I just want to thank everyone for attending. We'll continue. I've got a few more questions here that we'll get to, but I want to acknowledge your valuable time. I want to thank you for everyone that's attended, and certainly want to thank my colleagues at OPC, KM Tech, Dudley at Gaydens, and the guys, Brett and the guys at Subnet. I think to wrap this up, again, we'll continue some questions. Again, this has been recorded. We'll distribute this out to those that attended. Please do yourself a favour. Get a gap analysis done. Get a gap analysis done. Do you understand where your risks are, where the shortfalls are, to be able to plan for the worst. And again, we would encourage you all to reach out, ask any questions that you may have from here. But I'm just acknowledging your time. So those that need to drop off, thank you again. And we really appreciate, hope you found this of value today. And on that note, you know, I can still see we've got a lot of people that are still on here. There's very few people that have dropped off. So I think they have an interest here. If you have a question from the audience, please either take yourself off mute. I just can see we've got a couple here now that we'll try and get through. Before we do that, I want to unpack one last thing here, which is around, there are a lot of organizations that have existing internal IT capability. And I want to talk about the merit and what is an existing or emerging trend about a co-managed cyber-focused program. I'm going to throw this out to all the board members at the moment. A point in case is that example I gave you a moment ago where this particular client that we're working through, they've been working through this for 2 days, and effectively their internal IT team had got them recovered or get them close to a recovery point at the 3-day mark. And when the CEO called me for assistance, I said, look, that's fine. Go and talk to your insurance. But let's talk about what's happened since then. Let's talk about the ramifications, because often we focus on a business to recover. Scotty talked about extortion, right? And what I was alluding to with this particular client is what we need to prepare for is the opportunity that they have taken your data outside the network, and they're going to use this sophisticated extortion methodology to extract money from you. I got a call 30 minutes before this call today, because that conversation was 24 hours ago. They actually got a phone call this morning around, we have your data, and if you don't pay us, we're going to effectively promote that out in the net. So I want to throw to anyone that wants to run with this. In a world where a lot of the organizations will deal with, they have IT capability, but is there merit in looking at a co-managed focused program to benefit clients? Because, you know, let's face it, they spend a lot of money on their IT teams.
Yeah, certainly from my point of view, I think there absolutely is. Without trying to, you know, toot our own horn or the people on this panel, I think what we're finding in talking to many clients is that one of the big issues is internally, especially IT teams, they're focused on a lot of the operational thing. It's kind of like the discussion that Scott had earlier with the difference between a managed service provider and a managed security service provider. If your internal teams are like a managed service provider working on the day-to-day operational, they quite often don't have time or experience or the ability to spend time on looking at what the latest threats are, how they may be impacting, and they're coming through daily, they're coming through every minute. So having someone that has people dedicated and tasked to that, and to be frank, spending a ton of money on those type of people doing it that you may or may not be able to do internally, I think really is the only way of covering a lot of that. In talking to a lot of clients, even simple stuff like we ran through the Essential 8, but things like, you know, part of the Essential 8 says 48-hour patching of critical vulnerabilities. You know, back in the day, it wasn't so much of a problem from a technical nature where you're patching once a month or twice a month with the Microsoft Patch Tuesday and away you go. Nowadays, if you're patching critical vulnerabilities and you've got all different environments, whether that's Adobe or, you know, your QNAP device or something like that, you're basically patching every single day. And to do that with an internal IT team, it means at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever their out of hours is, they're having to get in and patch your environment almost every night. How do you cover that without, I guess, supporting or being supported by a third party? And that's I think where the real benefit is from working with a provider, you know, whether it's one of us or any provider, being able to have that coverage and have that support where you're not necessarily going to be able to do it with a team of even 1 or 2. And in, I guess, a lot of cases with people on the call, they may not, their IT person may also only be, you know, maybe their accountant or maybe someone else that's already has a role that, you know, doesn't have the capability or the skill set to be able to, you know, send someone away for a week training here or there to do security focused training. So I think it is definitely really difficult to do internally, and supporting that by working with a third party, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
Sorry, I was just going to say, can I add to that? Because the analogy I was given before the call was that it takes a village to raise a child, and I'd say it takes a village to manage an incident. And Brett's absolutely right. You, as an organisation that's hit by a ransomware attack, as an example, you're in a very vulnerable position to manage that directly. And so don't be a stranger. Call out to your your MSPs and your other providers. Often the first question to ask is, when you receive that ransom note, is there a decryption key available for this ransomware variant? And we went through a ransomware attack with a client several weeks ago, and they were well down the path before they even asked that question. And I said, look, there are organisations out there that we work with that will have decryption keys available, who may have negotiated against this particular hacking group before. So before we start worrying about whether we pay or don't pay ransoms, tap into that network. Sorry, I cut across. Clint, you go for it.
Right. I was just going to second what Brett said. It is a fundamentally different skill set to manage cybersecurity incidents and understand what's happening in an incident, but also managing the environment to protect you. We all talk about ransomware and what we do after the fact. We have to make sure we're putting the borders around your environment to protect you first. If you're not working with cybersecurity in that space all day, every day, then it's hard to move in and out. So being an operational, as Brett said, and coming in and drifting in and out of security is very difficult. We've formed a security team that just does security. And I think reaching out to organisations that have that capability will just extend your capability into your network and protecting your organisation.
Yeah, thanks, Clinton. There was also a question there. Sorry, Adam, just to jump in, addressed to me from Clinton. That example about that I gave the Queensland MSP, they actually aren't a customer of ours. So they're a partner. Sorry, one of our partners. It's their customer. So I actually don't know the inside outs of how they handled that or responded, but currently not our customer.
No worries. Thank you.
Go on, sir.
I just said thanks, Adam.
Yeah, look, I think one of the takeaways here that we're learning is that, a lot of the people on this call, we do presentations to, either clients where we aren't their MSA, they might have, as I said, an internal IT team, or prospects potentially. And, the learnings that we take out of the lot is that generally the market don't have the tools or skill set to effectively guide an organisation through the landscape because it's changing so rapidly. Clint and I, as an example, we did a presentation to a multinational recently that has tens and tens of thousands of employees globally, have a very, very strong local IT presence. They have a cloud team and they have a CISO, yet they're still working their way through what the strategy should be. So even an organization of that size is looking for help. And if they're looking for help, what does an SME in this country really needs? So it's an interesting topic, and one that will continue to evolve. Look, we still have a lot of people on this call, so again, I'm going to ask anyone to call out. If you give you a second here, if you have a question, please take yourself off mute and feel free to call it out. Otherwise, we have a couple more to go through here. Are the panelists and presenters happy to hang around for a few more minutes?
Yeah, that's fine.
We're good.
On what you just said there, Adam, about the conversations we've had, it is interesting to see that multinationals that have a CISO, which is a security officer within the organisation, don't have a fundamental understanding of Australian businesses and what's affecting Australian businesses, the size of Australian businesses, where everyone on this panel has tailored a solution that meets Australian standard, Australian business needs, and the Essential 8. So it is. I enjoy some of these conversations that Adam and I are having with multinationals, and they're coming back and going, wow, this is amazing how you're protecting organisations in Australia. You're certainly a lot further ahead than what they're seeing in the US.
Yeah, and I think, Clinton, just to add to that, I think one of the things to be very aware of, because it can feel very daunting going down that cybersecurity path. As Adam mentioned earlier, it's all about increasing your maturity over time. So no one on the call is expecting you to chuck in, unless you happen to have some spare $250,000 down the back couch. We're not expecting you to do everything at once straight away. It is very much a piece by piece and just improve over time. So if the very first thing on the list from today is I don't have an incident response plan, find the template. We can help provide them and work through an incident response plan. At least you're better tomorrow than you were today. And it's the same thing with the rest of it. Keep chipping away at it over a period of time, and then use people like managed security service providers to help get you there over a period of time. So don't expect you need to have everything done by tomorrow.
And understand the costs associated if the worst does happen. Dudley can probably speak to it more, seeing what's happened in the market. But the expense and the outage and the productivity loss, if you are hit, it's just something that has to be taken into consideration when you're looking at budgeting. And you need to be budgeting. You need to be putting a budget aside for your cybersecurity. It is a critical part of your business.
I think they're great points, and what we're human beings, and everyone on this call, from the panelist point of view, is generally a business owner. And we understand that there is a perception out there that these are fireside boogeyman stories, right? We get it, right? But unfortunately, they're not. And what we tend to work with is organisations that have been a little bit slow to move and get started, and that's okay. We understand that, they do appear to be boogeyman stories. We're on the other side of the fence, and we're actively working with organisations. So for us, we Scotty spent a lot of time today talking to you about real world situations that he's worked through. I can assure you that both Bretts from OPC and Subnet could give you 10. I could give you 10 stories about what's happening out there. What we want you to take out of this for your own benefit. Find out where your gaps are, understand is the risk something you can accept, and then move forward and do the fundamentals. Brett, Lodge raises a really good point. Do it in a consistent approach to make sure that you accepted your risk. And look, unfortunately, for those directors and board members that are on this call, part of your duties and responsibilities are to now know that that is something you have to do, and how you manage a breach, and that you're ready and capable. I mean, what we're promoting and what Essential 8 really promotes is one thing, all right? It doesn't guarantee you that you won't be breached. It does not guarantee that you'll be protected. Effectively, the measures are being designed to ensure that you can recover in a controlled and predictable manner, with as minimal business disruption as you can. That's what you should be aiming for.
Yeah. And don't just hang your hat and rely on cyber insurance. As it's been discussed, it's not always going to come to the party. It's the last thing we want to think about is having to go down that path. Let's protect your business before we get to that stage. So don't just think, I've got cybersecurity insurance. If the worst case happens, I'll just rely on that, because that's not typically the case.
So I'm going to pause for a sec. Look, we're down to, there's still about 20 plus attendees outside the panels on here. If there's any questions, please take yourself off mute and call them out. It's a pretty scary topic. I think I'm going to throw over to Dudley for a couple of final questions here. Ransomware was mentioned a lot throughout the presentation. In terms of ransomware attacks, what are the top 5 priorities organisations hit by ransomware? What should the top 5 priorities be?
Can I hijack that question with another question?
Let's do.
Scotty, and I'm going to be a bit controversial here. So Scotty, you can come down on me like a ton of bricks. We talked a little bit about to pay or not to pay, and the rise of extortion based incidents. I used to be a really big fan of saying no circumstances do you pay the ransom, but with some more recent events occurring, I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that question, and I guess there's a couple of points worth making. One is we're seeing a lot of insurance policies excluding ransomware attacks from their coverage. So organisations are having to go it alone and form their own strategy around how to deal with a ransomware attack. Part of that strategy needs to be, do we engage with the hacker? If we do decide to go down that path, and we obviously, you do go down that path with your eyes open, because it raises, lots of issues, the ability to recover data properly, the fact that you'll be a poster child for the hacking community as soon as you pay that ransom, the difficulty of being of obtaining crypto in the time period that's being requested, all those sorts of things pop up as live issues. But there are organisations that do deal with and negotiate ransom requests directly with the hackers. So I think it needs to be part of the conversation. I won't say that we'd be recommending that people, immediately respond to a request and make that payment, but I do think it needs to be part of the incident response, at least as a consideration. We would always say in the background you should be running your forensic and technical response to try and recover that data through your MSSP appropriately. but be open to negotiating a quick win or a quick release. Again, we would typically look for what we call proof of life in a ransomware negotiation. So having the hacker demonstrate that they do have the keys available so they can free up one of those servers that they may have locked up as a demonstration of good faith. So I think the conversation around ransomware and how to respond to it's just becoming a bit more sophisticated. It's not necessarily as clear cut as it used to be, but I guess the message is, and again, it's been said before, include that as part of your incident response planning. Include a position around how you want to respond to ransomware risks within that response plan, and test it. Make sure that that it actually works for you as an organisation. So sorry, Adam, I hijacked your question and asked a completely different one, but I'm keen to hear if any of the panel have got any other thoughts on that. Scotty,
sorry,
you
Brett,
would, because you were you'd be on the opposite side of the fence to me on this.
No, 100%. No, not at all. So that comment that I said was purely make sure that you've got the backups in place so you don't have to go down that path. You protect your own backyard, and then you should never have to pay the ransom, even if there's a backup. Because my point from that was, even if you don't pay it and they use extortion, your data is released anyway. But to your point, what you said before is really important too. If you have to go down that ransomware payment and you need to be working with a third party that have the specialized techniques to ask what to do. And a lot of the things that we're seeing when ransomware are coming in and they're asking to pay the ransom, you as the user, you have to go back and ask them to provide you a subset of your data. And in a lot of cases, they won't, because they actually haven't ransomwared your data. Okay, so you need to check that with them first. But if you can't access that data and they can actually provide you with a subset of data that you can go in and verify and go, well, that's the data, we need it, and we don't have backups, then 100%, because that's the only option you've got. Yeah, but obviously, you know, if we can ingrain the essential aid and do the basics right, we're hoping that should never have to, you know, take place.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. Sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, the only thing I was just going to add to that is there is a bill going through Parliament at the moment, is they are going to start forcing people to also publish when they do pay ransomware attacks. So that's the other thing that is coming. So if you do end up paying it, be aware there may be some legislative requirements around publishing that data to the ACSC and others to say that, yes, we did pay an attack, we did get hit by ransomware. So that's something that's coming as well.
Yeah, it's on the table. I mean, I'm not sure, it was a Labor bill that got proposed and it hasn't got up yet, but it's definitely on the agenda. And it's really it's been driven by government saying, hey, as organisations, we don't want you to support this wave of this business opportunity for the hacking community. It's too much of a security risk to Australia broadly, so we're going to make it more difficult for organisations to make that payment, because we'll out them or require them to notify. So yeah, it makes it even more challenging, doesn't it, Brett?
So guys, one thing, final comment on that topic is that the stats that we're seeing globally now are, unfortunately, organisations that have suffered some sort of breach or ransomware attack or otherwise are actually being targeted again in the future, and that's a concerning trend that we're seeing. So, a couple of things, last takeaways here. Essential 8 and everyone on the panel has talked about 3 components of cybersecurity: detect, respond and recover, right? Bearing in mind that each of them have a different level of maturity and a different approach. From what we're seeing in the Australian market is that we really need to start to understand the fundamentals. Where are the gaps? Do you have the ability? Scotty talked about the average of 200 days before an organisation actually knows about a potential network breach, right? So just make sure that you're comfortable that how long would it take for you to detect them, right? Look, all things have to come to an end. We still got a bunch of people on here, which is testament to the topic and the landscape environment we all live in as owners these days. But unfortunately, I think it's probably time to wrap this up. Again, I want to thank all the panelists, the people that have contributed to making this. Hopefully everyone has got a lot out of it. We will contact you and distribute the deck today that you may want to use. And as a parting comment, please reach out to OPC, to Subnet, to KM Tech, to Core Tech, and start a gap analysis as a port of call, or review your incident response at the very least. So thank you all, really appreciate it, and hopefully you've got a little bit out of it that's going to give you food for thought.
Thanks, Adam. Great job.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Adam.
Scotty.
See you.
Thanks.